Welcome to another episode of Just More Fix. This is James. With me in this episode is Lacey.
Hey.
You can find us online at justmorefix.com or on Twitter at justmorefix. If you like us, you can support us at Patreon, and you can give us a rating and a review at iTunes or wherever you find us at. In this episode, we're going to continue our Improving Fantasy Gaming series with Magic. And now, it's time to get our gaming fix.
I'm Chris from All Things Good and Nerdy, a proud member of the Good and Geek Network, just like the show you're listening to right now. The opinions expressed are those of the individual hosts. Make sure you check out all the other great podcasts at GonnaGeekNetwork.com and get ready, because geekiness begins in 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to Just More Fix. First off, we will be at Indie Game Days, that you guys, I'm sure, are tired of hearing about, but we will be at Game in Terre Haute hosting another Indie Game Days on October 20th from 1 to 5. So if you want to come out and try out some games and play some RPGs with us, we will be there, and we hope to see you guys there. Second off, a big thank you to everyone out there who has supported us, especially through Patreon. To Todd, thank you very much for all your support through Patreon, and as well as anyone who has put up reviews. We've gotten several new reviews on iTunes in the past few weeks that have been very positive, and we really appreciate you guys for doing that. So thank you, and if you haven't reviewed us, you can go to iTunes or wherever you find us at and give us a review, and that would be awesome. And also, you should check out our Patreon and support us there as well if you're able to help us continue to bring you more awesomeness and hopefully upgrade some of our equipment and do some new and awesome cool things. You can have access to all of our raw audio feeds, our pre-show and post-shows, as well as the early releases of a lot of things like our actual plays of Night Witches and our interviews that are put in a schedule to be released as well. Those get put up as soon as they are done being edited, or not edited, put together, because we don't really edit interviews. So
we don't edit them for content.
Correct. Yeah, we clean up the audio and that kind of stuff. That's about it. Right on. All right. So big thank you to everyone out there for helping support the show and helping us grow. We couldn't do this without you. So just wanted a big shout out to all of you guys for supporting us out there and sharing us with everyone. So today we're going to continue to try and improve our fantasy gaming. And we talked about a whole lot of stuff and topics and things about how we should work this out. And really, Magic is the number one piece of fantasy gaming that makes it fantastical and wondrous and amazing, right? So it makes sense to kind of start things off there.
It's also the number one category of character that I won't play because it's such a hot mess.
It's true. It's true.
So let's just jump right in here to my very first pet peeve, probably the largest factor as to why I have no desire to ever play a wizard in a classic D&D style campaign. Spell levels.
There is very definitely a certain amount of analysis paralysis that comes because maybe not in OSR games because the spell lists are much shorter and much smaller and they've condensed them down, but definitely if you're playing a 3rd edition or a Pathfinder game, or you're playing a 5e game, there are a lot of spells just in the player's guide, let alone if you add any of the other splat books to it, right?
Yeah, but before you even get that far, first you tell me, okay, sit down. I'm going to have everybody here at the table make a 5th level character. And then I'm like, sweet, it's a fantasy game. You're already playing a barbarian. The very moment, next natural thing that we need is a wizard. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to be a wizard. Okay, now I need you to pick 1 5th level spell,
right,
3 4th level spells, 50 0 level spells, and 29 and a half 2nd level spells. Now, and you lost me.
As you just said that, I realized something, right? And it's sort of like when you make a fighting class character, right? The choices that you make about your character are generally speaking like feats and equipment. Those are your big choices to make, right? And for the most part, those are pretty straightforward. Your equipment, I'm going to fight with this kind of a sword and I want this kind of armor and whatever. And those are pretty standard, right? And I thought, man, it's really a lot bigger than that with wizards. But I can tell you from playing lots of them and making spell lists and all this stuff, it's really not for me. It's really as simple as choosing, I'm an elf, I'm going to do longbow and long sword, or I'm a barbarian, so I'm going to do two-handed sword or great axe or something crazy like that. It's fireball, lightning bolt, magic missile, detect magic, sleep, and this very straightforward, generally speaking, most utilitarian and most effective spell list, right? Mm-hmm. And it's almost no different than choosing longsword, dagger, longbow, composite arrows, whatever, at a certain point. And,
Okay, but
and that's boring. That's my only point.
okay, but like complexity wise, you're saying, okay, I don't give it any more thought than this, and okay, you've done it a lot more than I have, just
Right,
because
yeah.
I have a
With that-
natural aversion to it.
Right.
But
With that one caveat.
stop.
Correct.
So you've made the barbarian. You've chosen your feats. Here's the 5 things that I can do as the super awesome barbarian. One of them is probably cleave, and the other one's probably greater cleave. So you don't even need to remember that you have the first thing.
Right.
Right? You have greater cleave, the rest is irrelevant. Now, from here on out, when you're playing that character, the list of things that you have to keep track of,
Much smaller, yeah.
super minimal.
Right.
Very minimal.
Did I use my
If you
great
don't-
cleave today?
If you don't play an archer, you don't even have to keep track of the
Right.
number of arrows and
Right.
bolts. Like, you're done.
Yeah.
Like, if you're a wizard, you're keeping track of how many spells you use this day, how many hours you slept to see how many spells you got back, like how many of which level you've used. It's just
It is a lot. I agree. My only thing is, like, once you've done it enough, unless you're making something that's super thematic, the initial choice is, now the complexity of the spells is much higher than a longsword's D8 damage. But the initial choices, if you're used to it, are very simple and straightforward. And that's boring. That's my only point. Not that it's easy or that it's that's not even fun. It's boring.
And then I have the same problem when you get into the spell list, which I guess we're kind of hopping to the next category we were going to talk about, which was tired spells.
Yeah,
so I guess
kinda
before
connects
we
together.
like move off from that, when it comes to the spell levels, my other problem is that the number limit is kind of arbitrary.
Yeah, I agree.
Right? Like, you don't set a limit on the number of goblins that the fighter can stab in one day. There's just greater risk of him taking more
Right.
damage and becoming just physically tuckered out.
Well-
So why isn't there some kind of caveat, whereas like as a wizard, I'm involved in this super battle, I've already used all my spell slots for today. Maybe I just I want to push a little bit harder
Hmm.
and be really tired. Maybe I want to give myself a brain hemorrhage, which I can worry about later, so that I can continue
Right.
to live to the other side of this battle.
Roll D4 aneurysm. Right. I agree.
And then I think you mentioned something about a mechanic for channeling.
Yeah, in second edition, and this has been a long time ago, in second edition, they had several different versions of magic that you could use, and one of them was channeling. And I don't remember the specifics of it, but there was some kind of a thing where you could take constitution damage or something, or hit point damage, to be able to cast more spells. And it was sort of like an exhaustion thing. And there are lots of books that involve this where using magic is physically taxing on your body. And I like the idea of that in a story. It's very cool. It's just mechanically, it's kind of hard to work that out for where the fine line of that is. Because once you do that, naturally what players will do is boost up whatever it is that they channel from. So whether that's their constitution score or their hit points or whatever you're drawing from, they just sort of boost that up. And at a certain point, if that continues to raise, they become godlike, like high level wizards do, which I guess isn't any different there. But the risk of physical danger from the channeling seems to go less and less and less and less, right? So I think it's a cool idea. It just needs to be worked out in a kind of if you're going to add something like that to your game, I think it's super cool. Kind of like they do that in some of the Fate games, like Fate of Freeport, where if you're going to cast a spell, you have the option to take it as stress, mental stress. So you can mark a stress box and cast a spell. And then if the encounter continues going, eventually you're going to fill up your stress boxes, and you begin taking consequences, which might be, I have a bloody nose, sort of like Stranger Things with Eleven when she's doing the stuff and her nose bleeds. And then at the same time with that, you can delay your casting to sort of roll to create an advantage, and you can use that advantage to cast the spell, basically. So there's a ways around it to where it's sort of more flexible. And I really like the idea of that. It's very cool and adds some
I've done
new
a
interesting choices.
spellcaster in that system, and I definitely prefer that a lot more.
Right. We've laid out some of the problems here, so we're gonna kind of go through each of these little things that sort of are hanging points for Magic, and try and give you something constructive to use. And the spell level thing I think is kind of weird because it is kind of arbitrary. You can cast 3 at this level and 1 at this level and whatever, but you do have to have some sort of rules in place to sort of balance the spellcasters with the fighting classes. Otherwise, they sort of start to run away, right? But I've never liked where I've used all my second level spells for today. I can't cast any more of those, but I have 5 first level spells. Now, why can't I convert those over? So one of the things that we had done in a game before was, each spell level gave you that many sort of levels of spell casting, right? So if you have 3 first level spells, that's 3 levels of spell you can cast, right? And then you go back off the same exact chart, and then if you can cast 2 second level spells, that's a total of 4 spell levels. And then 1/3 would give you a total of 10 spell levels you can cast in a day.
See, I don't even like the idea of like converting to this. Just tell me you have 30 points of magical ability.
Well, yeah.
This is how much each thing costs. Spend it at your whim.
Well, that's
which is basically
what it is.
What you're saying,
Yeah.
but more complicated.
Well, no, but you could very easily make a chart where it's already totaled up.
Well, you could, or you could just say,
Well,
5th level spells cost you 5 magical awesome points.
That's
4th level spells
that's how
cost
it
you
works.
4 magical
Essentially,
awesome points.
it's just on the game master to make the amount of levels you have from 1st to 20th level by doing the math across that chart, and which is very straightforward and simple. But it's something more interesting to do, and it changes things a lot because then it's more about spell choice and what do I want to do and how does this work and what do I know, and that adds a new level of kind of complexity, but not a tremendous amount, but also a new level of choice in a big way.
There's some choice in the other one too, where it's like, okay, I've only got this one level 5 spell prepared, so is this really the thing I want to use it for? But it seems like more choice. I don't know that it actually is, but it seems more choicey.
Right. I agree. Another interesting thing is Vaginas Are Magic and Eldritch Cock added a type of magic in there where there are no spell levels. There are just spells. And Knave has done this as well, which is a newer OSR game that just came out on Drive-Thru that looks pretty interesting.
I like this a lot.
Yes. So there are no levels. These spells are sort of incredibly powerful in some ways, and then other ones are not nearly they're not balanced. But I don't think magic is meant to be balanced. It's just meant to do what it does.
Well, and even if you wanted to balance things a little bit more, most of, like when you're looking at D&D, most things when it comes to making the saves are based on spellcaster's level, in addition to how well they do on the roll. But most of it's, the DC is set incorporating their level in some fashion. So if you're only a level 1 wizard, that still factors into the difficulty for other people to overcome your magic if you're using that kind of system.
Right, exactly. So I think there are some interesting ways to do it. It's just, you have to set out in mind that we are going to make these changes at the beginning, because I think changing mid-stride is sort of really messes things up, especially if you've put a lot of time and thought into the wizard you have. It can really just sort of jack things up pretty bad.
Mm-hmm. And you can still incorporate like the number of different spells that you know.
Right.
Just not from any particular level.
Right.
And the other thing we talked about, I guess that's in tired spells, but it's kind of a natural segue from here, is the random spell selection.
Right.
That's something that's incorporated in the Vaginas Are Magic book as well, where you have the option to randomly select spells from the list.
And in the main LOTFP book, it's in there as well. When you first make your character, you roll randomly what spells you have. And then when you go up a level, you roll once randomly, and that appears in your spell book as well. And what that does is it sort of
first of
makes
all, I would
things
like
weird.
to say, we know that the natural reaction to that idea is, oh my God, no,
Right.
I am aghast at this idea.
Well, I think that's also part of the OSR mindset, that you just roll what happens and then you just sort of figure it out and roll with it.
But like, here's a couple reasons why, once you do it this way, you will see the wisdom in it and not want to do it the other way. First of all, it doesn't make any sense that everyone in your world only has the same 10 or 15 spells out of a book of 200 spells. It's like existing in a fantasy world with 5 monster manuals worth of monsters and only ever meeting goblins and kobolds.
Right.
It's nonsense. So this gives everybody a chance to have a little bit of play. It also makes your wizards infinitely more valuable for certain things, because now not every wizard on the block knows how to dispel magic. You might be the guy that does this thing.
Right.
And if you want something else done, then you're going to have to find the other guy that does something different. And my last and probably most favorite reason why this is awesome is because it forces you to come up with more creative solutions using the tools that you have available.
Right. And I agree with everything you said there. And another piece to this is that at a certain point, it's just fun. It's just ridiculous fun to be like, why does the wizard only have Tensor's floating disk? Like, why? Why did this happen? Like, who?
Why? Because he doesn't want to have to pay to feed a horse.
Well, what I'm saying though is
He can carry all of his belongings.
It's just funny because that's sort of the conundrum that everyone is forced into, right? And it creates some fun and awkward and weird role playing moments, and it encourages some really creative use of spells, which is even more fun. And I think that if you are running that kind of a game and you're the game master and your spellcasters have some weird spell combinations that might not be as useful as what they're used to, I would encourage you to be a little more lenient in how they try to use them to make them interesting and add to the story and add to the encounters, and maybe bend things a little bit to where they are maybe a little more effective or flexible in certain ways, so that they don't feel like they have no agency in the game and they serve no purpose. Because that's not what you're after at all. We're trying to make things more wondrous and more magical.
Right. And so, okay, let's say the people at your table are 100% against random spell selection. There will be a literal revolt and table flip if that is the idea that you choose to incorporate. So we have a second option for you, my friends. Homebrewing spells.
Yes.
Why is this not happening more? Because it's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Really, the only system I come up with that lets you do things like that is Fate, and it's because of the stunt-based system.
Right.
But you could certainly do this with any system at all. The idea being that your player has a specific thing that they want to do. They come up with a general mechanic for it, and of course, they bring it to you, and you approve it to make sure that it's not going to break whatever is happening at your table.
It seems hard to come up with reasonably balanced spells that are brand new, right? But it's not that difficult because you have a ton of examples in front of you. So you know Fireball is a 3rd level spell. It does 1d6 per 2 levels of damage up to a max of 10 levels, right? But what if you have a character who is more thematically into acid? He's an acid wizard for some reason or whatever. And there's a game put out by White Wolf called Aberrant, and it's about superheroes, right? And something interesting that they did with Aberrant was they didn't try to make every single superpower. There's no way. You have Iceman, you have Human Torch, and all these other types of superheroes, right? So Iceman shoots balls of ice, and the Human Torch can shoot balls of fire, but fundamentally they're just shooting their superpower. So what they did was they took all of these things and sort of put them into broad categories and said, if you're going to shoot, it's called Quintessence Blast, right? And you can make it flavored however you want, but the basic rules of it are this. Mm-hmm. And you already have that sort of laid out in front of you with all, if you look at all the other spells. So maybe if he's shooting an acid ball instead of a fireball, instead of doing D6s, it does D4s. But the acid lasts longer when it hits you. It's not a blast and then it's gone. It lingers on you and it does some burn damage. So maybe the damage is a little less initially, but it does extended damage for 1 or 2 turns or something. So there's all these things that you can do thematically to make the spells that they have more personalized and more focused on them. And I feel like it's the same thing as having the barbarian that has the custom legendary epic sword that was wielded by Hercules or whatever hero it is. It's almost the exact same thing because now they have their trademark spells that they like to use. And I feel like
and the groundwork in the storyline is there, right? Because like you mentioned, there's the Bigby and Tasha.
Oh, yeah.
There's famous wizards that have their own spells. So why aren't there any other famous wizards making spells? We should have 8,000 different spells named after professional doctors by now, and we don't.
And think of it, in a world where magic is sort of everywhere, it becomes almost utilitarian in some ways, right? So everyone knows what a pickup truck is, but everybody has their preference on, I like a Ford pickup or a Chevy pickup or a Dodge or a Toyota or whatever it is. But fundamentally, they're all kind of the same thing, right? So what about if you had, I don't know, Bigby's detect magic versus Tasha's detect magic versus Wrastlin's. Like, they all do it a little bit differently. No, I'm telling you, the Tasha one is the best one. And it sort of adds this extra level of complexity and realism to a magical world where you wouldn't normally find it. Because think about someone you know who has a passion for whatever it is, whether it's cars or, I don't know, gaming systems or editions. Imagine the edition arguments that happen over what is the best edition of D&D if you have 8 different slight versions of Fireball. right?
Well, even if it's just complete nonsense, right? So, like in The Lord of the Rings, you have Gandalf who's making fireworks, and they all have these unique signatures and monsters that happen with them. So maybe your fireball comes out, and it comes out in the shape of like a Harry Potter, like
Right.
everybody's got their own Patronus charm kind of thing. So you have that because then maybe the magic in your world is a little bit more artistic.
Well, I think it almost has to be because
I think it depends on what you're doing.
well, you're in most worlds, magic is this force of chaos, and you're sort of bending it to your will. And if you are bending chaos to your will, I think part of your personality and who you are has to come out of the magic that way. It almost makes more sense to have that than to not. And I think it's just a cool way to add that special flair. Legendary fencers, they have their own salute. Why wouldn't a legendary wizard, or even one who's not that good but thinks he's really awesome, why wouldn't he have that? Like, this is my custom magic missile. When it hits
This
him,
is my
it
signature
sparkles.
move.
Right, exactly. Like, oh, he got him with the doodad or whatever.
Right.
I mean, it's just, I feel like if magic was real, that's how it would be.
Well, and it kind of segues naturally into that where you're asking players, okay, so casting this spell, tell me what that looks like.
Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And that's something I think I've picked up from games like Fate and from the Powered by the Apocalypse is like, what does this success look like to you? What do you think that is? And functionally, it doesn't change anything that's happening in the game, but it gives that player the moment to sort of shine and have some extra cool spotlight time. Be like, well, when I cast Fireball, it's sort of like this.
Okay, so another big ticket item on my list of annoyances in general with fantasy gaming is risk. So let's talk about risk as it relates to magic.
Fundamentally, right now in most D&D style games, F20 games, Pathfinder, etc., when you cast a spell, it either goes off or it doesn't. If you take damage, you make a concentration roll. If you fail it, the spell doesn't go off. You lose the spell slot. We move on.
And let's just take a moment to appreciate how little sense that makes. You are literally harnessing energy from some source
Right.
and trying to mold it
Wait.
into something else or
No.
throw it at someone.
I think you are short selling that. You're not harnessing it from some source. You're harnessing the energy that sort of makes up the fabric of reality. Right? That's like, fathom that for just 1 second. This isn't even a nuclear bomb. It's the stuff that holds reality together. And that's what you're harnessing to make into a magic missile or whatever spell effect
and the
it
only
is.
bad thing that happens if you fail at it is that it just
Yeah, it fizzles away?
no. Like, when you mess up at fireworks, occasionally they sizzle and occasionally somebody's hands get blown off. Clean off,
Right.
irreversible damage.
Right.
And those are just fireworks.
So there are a few games that use miscast tables, and my favorite ones have come from out of the Vaginas Are Magic and the Eldritch Cock book.
But I have to throw some homage to Warhammer 40K because
yeah.
they were doing it with the Psychers way before
True.
Vaginas Are
Very
Magic was
true.
even a thing.
Very true. Yeah, because the Perils of the Warp is what it was called.
Yes, and
pretty
they
tremendous.
are phenomenal.
Well, now, you know what? That is the best example of what should happen when you are harnessing the stuff that holds the fabric of reality together and it goes horribly wrong. Like, you might literally just open a gate and Nurgle steps through. And hey, yeah, we're all cool. Blood for the blood god, skulls for the bone throne.
Nurgle's the god of chaos for those of you
Yeah.
that don't follow Warhammer.
Well, he's one of the chaos deities. He's the god of
He's my favorite.
undead. He's cool. I have this secret belief that Nurgle is actually the Imperium worships Nurgle because the Emperor lies in eternal slumber, being undead essentially, and the entire Empire or the Imperium is serving Nurgle, which I think is in the Dark Heresy game. That was my big reveal for you guys that we're never going to get back to. So
Seems plausible.
that was really wicked. I was like, that's so awful. So All right.
So anyhow,
yeah,
point
I
being,
digress. I'm sorry.
miscastings to come with some kind of real consequences. And whether you want to get the Warhammer book or the Vaginas Are Magic book, I think, right, all of LOTFP's books can be had in PDF form from their website.
Either you can get most of them through the Lamentations website, or a lot of them are either available on Drive-Thru RPG or Drive-Thru or RPG Now. It's the more indie one that's owned by One Bookshelf. So they're out there for sure.
And
Of
you
Vaginas,
can, check those out. Look at them, look them over. And I'm not even saying you have to use exactly what's there, but if you want to, go
More power
right
to
for
you.
it. It's really awesome. But some of the consequences on that one are seriously world-ending catastrophic.
Right.
So if that doesn't fit what you're doing, that's cool. But just look at it, see what it's about, and then adapt something for your table that fits what you're doing.
Right. Look, you can totally. There's a lot of things in the OSR stuff that if you're playing more traditional Pathfinder D&D style games, they will slide very easily into your game because they are made from the building blocks of what makes up D&D and Pathfinder. So they'll move very easily with very little conversion into your games. One of the very cool things, though, about the spells that are in Vaginas or Magic and Eldritch Cock is that they have a general miscast table, and then each individual spell has a miscast table for it as well. So you'll roll, say, a percentile dice, right? And if you roll 75 or higher on the table, then you go to the specific miscast table for the spell and then consult what that says, because that one has some more thematic miscast issues that are specific to that spell.
And I did say that a lot of them are catastrophic, and that's true. Some of theirs are very brutally, but some of the spells that they are tied to are so far beyond magic missile,
right?
That
yeah,
it's and that's kind of how we feel is like the miscasting, the risk should be at least on some plane equal to the reward.
Right. Yeah,
the higher level spell. The higher level, the consequence.
Right. So maybe if you're casting a first level spell and you have a miscast issue, maybe there's a 5% chance of true catastrophe. If it's second level, maybe it goes from 5 to 7 and on up until you're at 9th level. And if you have a miscast, then you're like 40 or 50% chance catastrophe. That's a lot of the stuff that holds reality together, just sort of breaking free and going wherever. Next thing you know, Hounds of Tindalos are there and they're eating everyone or something. So something along with risk is, and miscasting is, where do new spells come from? So you think about new tech. I like to compare magic to things that we have in the world today, and so I like to compare it to technology. So think about how fast technology is moving now, and all that technology comes from experimentation and trying things and failing and try and fail and try and fail. So where do new spells come from? Is there some wizard school with a scorch-ridden, cobblestone backyard where some guy's out there behind a brick wall basically learning to throw grenades, essentially, is what he's doing?
I mean, I sure hope so.
And I think that's an awesome thing to add to it. So maybe you might have characters who have spells that aren't entirely worked out 100% yet. We all know Fireball works. That spell's been around for 1,000 years. It's all good. But I do have this new Fireball that's overclocked just a little bit, but maybe there's an increased miscast chance with it or something that goes along with it.
Have a Discworld University of Magic.
Mm-hmm, exactly. Something along those lines could be very interesting. Or
something more serious, like Doctor Strange and Marvel.
Right. But there should be, I feel like there should be some more experimentation of magic because it is so incredible. And even if it's a terrible idea, people are still going to do it. The mad wizard is as common a trope as the mad scientist. You can't have fantasy without mad wizard, just like you can't have Frankenstein without mad scientist. It just doesn't work. That's one of those things you have to have. And I think if you have a mad wizard out there and it adds a certain level of risk, if there are victims or survivors from attacking him or from his attacks or whatever, and they have all these strange magical effects that have had happened to them, how impressive and how terrifying is that the characters are about to go after him? Maybe we should negotiate with him and not just go for the full frontal assault, because this dude is clearly harnessing things that we don't fully understand yet.
Well, and I feel like it's kind of a sad assumption that all of the wizards are dusty academics that are just poring over tomes. Like,
that's true.
When you think about people that have made stunning advancements in science, they are odd, quirky, creative individuals. And a lot of things that we think about as just being, okay, you measure and do these exact things and you put them together and you end up with the right stuff, whether it's baking or making explosives. Sure, there's a certain recipe, but somebody had to come up with that. Like, somebody was out there really racking their brain and trying this and that and plugging different things in to make it happen. Like, it doesn't all just...
I think your cooking analogy is perfect. Think of spaghetti. Everyone knows what spaghetti is, but everybody's grandma has their own spaghetti, and it's got more garlic and less salt, or it's got...
It better have more garlic.
I agree. Definitely more garlic. Always more garlic. But... or meatloaf or whatever it is, meatballs, I don't care, whatever common food you want to think of, everyone makes it their own little way. Here's the base recipe, but this is what I do. This is what makes it really taste good. It's like a lot of people compare cooking like to art in a way. You put a piece of yourself in there, and
Yeah, I mean, you can make any recipe with the main recipe, but you're not really cooking until you're starting to stray off and experiment and put your own things together to see, what you can come up with.
well, and think about it. When you talk to whether it's artists or people that are very passionate about cooking or anything where it's a creative enterprise, right? They are very passionate about what they do, and they can exactly tell you how it is that they put their own. This is where I am at in this piece. This is where I am at in this food. This is where my grandmother is at in this food, right? If you are able to harness the power that holds the fabric of reality together, how would you not be having that same outlook on what you do? It just seems so counterintuitive that people wouldn't take the same artistic approach to magic. And I think if they do, that should come through. And it comes through more in a narrative way as opposed to a rules way in most cases. I think if you want to take it to the next level and make it really awesome, then we're talking about making small rules changes and maybe the acid fireball thing and that kind of stuff. But it will make your magic shine and truly make it more wondrous and individual and stylized for that character or that villain or whoever. And I think it will be much, much more memorable.
I agree. So, yeah. Encourage spell experimentation at your table.
Right.
If you have a player that wants to do something and you're like, that spell's not really going to do it, then be like, okay, well, make your own spell.
And some of this may be hard for your players to grasp if you try to explain it to them all at once. It's kind of a lot to digest, right? But what if you lead by example and you're running your games? So when they go to the wizards, the magic shop or whatever, and they're like, oh, hang on, he's out back. If you want to go talk to him, he's out back. And he walks back there, and you see this wizard who runs this magic shop, and maybe he's a lower level wizard, right? Because he just runs a shop. He's not an adventurer. And he's out there experimenting with magic. And then maybe that sparks a process in your players and being like, wait a minute, could I do that? And then it's done. Now they're going to be way more creative with their character because all they think about is their character, not the entire world that you have to create.
Okay, so...
Not a real good segue for the next one, but...
Well, it kind of is. I mean, I feel like we kind of already touched on bending reality. I think the real point with that we're trying to make is that magic is an epic, fantastical thing. In so many of the fantasy stories and fantasy worlds, it's how you know that you're in fantasy
right.
and not some kind of historical fiction thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like it may be the creatures, but magic, right? It's kind of what you came to see.
Absolutely. And I also think that when you stop thinking about magic as +1 sword and first level spell and think of it as more of an abstract piece of what it's made of the things that hold the fabric of reality together. And when you realize that when you have characters running around harnessing the fabric of reality, harnessing the fabric of reality is pretty impressive. It's sort of like the average guy who's running around here and they have the capability to make nuclear bombs because that's really essentially with enough time, that's what they have, right? They're able to unmake reality. And I think considering things that way, well, first off, you should realize people should really be terrified of wizards once they know their actual power. But there's all this wondrous and crazy stuff and possibility that comes from it. And they can do literally anything almost. I mean, it just boggles the mind in a lot of ways if you want to go down that rabbit hole too far. It's just incredible. So make it that way. Make it feel that way.
I feel like we kind of, jump the line back and forth between like a high fantasy, high magic, and then like low fantasy, lower magic. But
I agree.
There's it's more about the ratio of difference, right? So
Right.
like the lower magic your world is in general, the lower the bar is for what counts as fantastical in the eyes of the everyday man. So you mentioned, like, I'm not familiar with Forgotten Realms, but there's a lot of magic in that world,
Right.
is my understanding.
Yeah.
And so then what it would take to impress the average person who's like, oh, yeah, I've seen that show. That's been on Netflix for a month, is much higher than in more of a low, regular, kind of ruddy medieval world where most people are just living the everyday farm life. And then all of a sudden, magic,
Right.
it's in.
Oh, yeah.
So what it takes to catch them off guard is not as
I think
grandiose.
Your threshold for where that lies definitely depends on the world you're in. Also, at the same time, it might depend on where you're at in the world. Because if you're just in some sort of backwater village, they may know that magic exists and there's these incredibly powerful wizards, but they may not have actually encountered it. And how powerless is the average peasant anyway? They're not going to be able to do anything to you, even if you are a low-level wizard, right? And bluffing is an incredible thing, which we haven't even mentioned. But it's if you have that potential power, there's no way to look at a person and be like, oh, that's a 9th level wizard, or that's a 20th level wizard. There's no way to know. If you're good at bluffing, you could be anything,
Right?
Right? So,
you mentioned kind of everyday people should be a lot more afraid of wizards if they knew what they were capable of.
Mhm.
But I would also make the argument that the everyday wizard should be a lot more harassed if the people knew what they were capable
that's
of.
true.
So why am I going to see midwife Betty over here when I know that Hermit Joe might be cranky and able to blow me up, but he could also cure this gout with like a click of his fingers?
Yeah.
So why are there not a line of peasants at your door? You basically have to be a traveling nomad wizard and like laying low and hiding so that there isn't a constant trail of people behind you, because medievalism is a large part of the fantasy world, and the medieval life for the common person is
Not good.
Well, it's
Not
beyond
good.
not good. Like it is.
Well, and that sort of, we've talked a lot about classic wizard stuff and arcane magic, but in most of your fantasy worlds, there's clerics with divine magic. And you mentioned curing gout. And when you can quite literally bring someone back from the dead, or heal grievous wounds, or eliminate diseases, or any of the things that they're capable of doing, it sort of changes it can kind of break the world a little bit if you really think about it too much. But if you have a world where every first level cleric can, if you have a first level person, right, and they have 6 hit points, so the difference between completely healthy and completely dead is 6 points. If I cast Cure Light Wounds at first level, it's 1d8 plus 1, which means there's a pretty good chance you could be on death's door, and I snap my fingers, say some spooky words, and now you're fully healed. And
I'm a little sad that there isn't any lasting consequence at all.
well, yeah, I agree with that, but it's
No, but adversity breeds character.
true.
And while I'm not saying I think you should just let your PCs die and, okay, we're going to take a literal month between this journey and the next one because you just need that time healing, even though that would really truthfully be the case, probably more than that. But I just feel like I don't like this idea where like, okay, I'm at 0 hit points, when I'm not really like dead till I get to neg 10. But even if I'm at neg 5 and you heal me completely, I'm going to be totally fine.
Lickety split.
100%.
I'm good to go.
Where's the grizzled warrior with the battle scars, or
Well, think about it
the
for a
guy
minute.
with the glass eye or something? I mean,
The tank is a classic sort of archetype you build your character around, right? So imagine the force of will it takes for you to say, we're going to go fight this dragon, and you're the fighter. So you're going to go stand in front of this thing, and you can take the most damage out of everyone here. And you're going to knowingly stand in front of this thing while it tears you to pieces and all the suffering and pain that comes with, while a guy behind you prays to some crazy deity and heals you through all that. And the terrible experience that would be, right? I'm like, it's kind of incredible that, and it's something we completely gloss over. And in a way, it might be a way to sort of give more respect and homage and insanity to what it is to be a fighter. Sort of fighters are like, oh, he's a 5th level fighter, whatever. But you're right, he is. But that dude is going to go and stand in front of whatever crazy monster is there and take claws and bites and fire to the face, while some dude behind him is holding out a holy symbol and curing wounds and whatever. Like, that's pretty crazy.
mm-hmm.
Like, that should have some kind of, maybe part of the consequences is that for mundane people that do that aren't magical but can stand there and have the force of will to do that, that is a pretty big deal. And then what does that do to them? Do they have scarring because of that, physical or psychological? I don't know, however you want to handle that. But it changes things a lot when you start to think about the reality of what healing actually does, like magical healing does, right?
That's another thing that I like about the fate system too, in that you can get rid of some of the temporary consequences, but there are other things that take a longer amount of time to get rid of.
So when you heal them, they go from like a major consequence to a minor.
Right. And I don't know exactly how you would reconcile that, but maybe you make it so that there's a certain amount of time involved. So if you're not healed within this amount of time, then there's some kind of permanence factor that impacts your character. Or anytime you go below 0 hit points, you're going to come back with some kind of consequence. But I don't think that it should be viewed just as purely a punishment. It's a quirk that makes your character interesting. It's a jumping place for a story. It's, how many times have you sat down with somebody that you've known and been like, I have this scar. This is from this when I was a kid. This is from this when I was an adult. This is the physical marker of a dumb decision that I made that I learned something from right here on my person.
Why do villains have face scars?
Because they're cool.
Yeah, as soon as you see a facial scar, you're like, that's a bad guy. Right there, that's a bad guy. Guarantee it, right?
But maybe it's not.
And it adds to that, though. It's those things that you know and you see and you sort of come to expect, right? And it's authentic battle damage, right? It used to be a thing for action figures or whatever. And I think it adds a certain amount of character, and maybe you could even go one step further and say maybe you can cast, instead of casting Cure Moderate Wounds, you can cast it and it does 1 or 2d8 less healing damage, but it heals without consequence. Right. So now we're only healing 1d8 damage, but there's no consequences of this healing. It's perfect healing.
Or you could incentivize it on the individual player's end and you say, you've been healed completely, but as a caveat, just know anytime that you fall below 0 hit points and you're brought back to full health, you have the option to take some kind of social, mental, physical flaw as a result of that damage. And in exchange, I will give you a certain amount of experience points for taking that and incorporating it into your character.
Or notoriety or fame, because everyone knows, this is the dude that stood up to Orcus and he got clubbed in the face and he has this face, this scar, or half of his hair is gone now, or whatever it is, right? Yeah, and it sort of gives you this
looking like the Hound,
well, that's a great example of it. There's that scarring that exists and it makes him who he is, right? It really impacts his character and everything he does. And along with the healing, the thing for me that keeps coming back to me is they can bring people back from the dead. Like, that's a huge big deal, and it just seems glossed over so much in a lot of places. Now, granted, it's expensive if you're going into a temple to pay for it, so maybe it's something that only the aristocracy or nobility or the adventurers can afford. But I think that should add a certain amount of complications to the world, right? So all the problems that we have now in society with poverty and the haves and have-nots, right? Imagine if you can just bring someone back from the dead because they died, if you have the funds to do it. Or if you know a guy, I'm really good friends with this priest and he can bring people back from the dead, right? Like, that's crazy. That is crazy.
See, but I feel like that segues very naturally into my next point, is that faith healing is broken. I'm just going to throw it out there. Why is it that you get to have a deity and you get to have all this magic and absolutely nothing is asked of you? That is bananas. Okay.
Right.
First of all, I'm going to throw this out there, and there should be a mischance for God. Hear me out, because it's not 100% blasphemy, right? So a little bit, but not entirely. Any religion that you go to, they're going to be like, okay, well, the gods, they're operating on a whole nother level that is beyond your meager mortal understanding.
Right.
Any religion at all. And it ranges from pure indifference and godly politics like Greek mythology to, well, God has his own master plan. Whatever the case may be, whether it's all plotted out neatly or they just are, maybe we will, maybe we won't, depends on if we're bored or not,
right. Ares got lost, whatever.
Yeah.
Right.
You should pray all you like, but there should be some kind of percentile die that you roll at the end of that scenario.
Right.
And that's the decision. On a 50, okay, maybe it's a little blasphemy to say 50. On a 40% chance, your God is like, nah, I'm good. You don't know the reason, but for whatever reason, he's decided not to intervene on this one. 60%, you get, or maybe it should be broken down even farther than that. Out of that 60 remaining percent, 30% you get exactly what you asked for. The other 30% you get some kind of version of what you asked for, but maybe not quite what you expected. I don't think that's asking too much. It adds a lot of flavor, I feel like.
And I think if you're looking at the miscast style thing, I think you could probably directly correlate the level of spell that you're asking for to that. So the more you're asking for and the more power you're asking for, perhaps there's a higher chance of saying, no, that doesn't fit into my master plan.
Like, silly mortal, you're going to topple the balance of the universe.
If you're casting literally the spell Miracle, they might be, no, that doesn't fit. I'm sorry. I have this other thing going over here, or in 30 years this is going to happen, and that's just not a possibility.
Right, like your good deity may have a side bet going with the evil deity over here, and killing this guy off and bringing him back is just going to kibosh everything.
Well, I suppose that kind of fits into how your gods interact with the world, because in a lot of the fantasy worlds, they're not omnipotent. They don't know everything. They don't know all the potential. So that may just be as simple as, well, I'll always do this because, I don't know, we'll see what happens. Maybe if you're an evil deity, you never say no because the possibilities are endless, right? And
it's a chaos deity.
Either way, chaotic evil, whatever. But I think there should be some variation in there depending on maybe if you're a priest of Torm, like the god of honor and duty, it's very, very strict in what he will allow and what he won't.
I also kind of like the idea of adding this in because if you're going to go hardcore on the deity world, there should be some other entities there too. So maybe you really wanted this thing and your god said no. Well, guess what? Here's this quaint little demon that steps in that's like, hey, buddy, I could work that out for you.
Right.
See, the big guy, he ain't listening right now. Well, I've got a deal for you.
Well, and then in a world where the agents of the gods have essentially superpowers and walk among mortals, it should have a huge impact on how the average person lives. People, I think it would, if when Dave, the local priest, comes down and says, you need to come to service and say your prayers to Torm, I think you're much more likely to go when you know that he can, with the flick of a wrist and some words, cure any disease that you might have, or solve or neutralize any poison, or cure any wounds that you like. There's a certain amount of leverage that comes when you have those essential superpowers, right? And I think that should have a larger effect in the world. And in the same way that maybe wizards should be truly feared because they have the potential to harness the material of reality, maybe clerics should be revered to that same degree because of the potential of good that they could do with just a few words, right? And your cleric walks through the street with a holy symbol and everybody's like, oh yeah, that's the priest of Paladine. Yep.
We keep him around so
there he goes.
Can heal us.
Yep. He's a nice guy. There should be people following and asking for, please heal my club foot or my gout or whatever the problem is, right? Because it's a huge deal. Like, it's a big deal.
People lining the streets, laying down palm branches in front of your donkey because thank God you're back in town.
Yeah, very much so.
And okay, so along with that idea is the idea of the daily rituals that you're doing. So it shouldn't be like, okay, it's time for the party to rest. I'm going to say 2 hours of prayer before I go to bed. Now I'm good for the next day.
It's all good.
Yeah. We're all good now. No. Where are all the goat sacrifices? You know, why is that not happening? Gods, they make demands of you. They're like, I'm doing these things for you. This is what I ask of you, my child. There should be more quests, more demands, more sacrifices.
And I think using these is just a great example of you don't have to make the faiths and religions of your fantasy game super realistic to push on people's buttons, but it is interesting to draw from actual sources in the real world for possibilities of what might exist in a more fantastic world. So I just think that there's a lot more potential there, because along with the way we sort of just make wizards sort of mundane, and this is the wizard and he has a spell book and he can do this stuff and that's what it is, we do the exact same thing to clerics, and they have a very similar power level to the wizard, and they just get overlooked. It's just, yeah, that's the wizard, and that's the cleric, and this guy can unmake reality, and this guy can raise people from the dead. Whatever. Like, I feel like that is what makes fantasy. It's so crazy fantastical. And when you watch movies, like, I know you don't like Conan, but Khazad-dûm is worshipped in that movie as a god, and it's really, really crazy and incredible what he can ask and demand from his followers because they have this unbelieving devotion, right?
Well, we talked about where the bar is depending on how medieval your world is. When you're talking about a guy that can instantly make water drinkable in an era where most people are killed by crappy sanitation conditions.
Right. Yeah, he's now the ruler of the town because he can make clean water. True story. So I just think that there's a lot more potential there to use, and you can use contemporary things to draw in to sort of make the reality of their world a little more believable and a certain level of realism. And at the same time, you still want to be playing a game and you want to have fun. But I think that if you add just a few little things, it can really make the games shine and make them interesting in new ways that you probably haven't thought about or experienced before. Now, all that said, we've focused a whole lot on tons and tons of fantastic and amazing things that everyone does. But what about at a practical level? There's all kinds of quacks that exist out there, right? To compare this to medical science, okay? There's everybody, doctors and and pharmacology and all this great stuff. They do amazing stuff, right? But there are a gajillion and one quacks out there. Hucksters, snake oil salesmen, whatever you want to call it. Why isn't there that for wizards or for magic or clerics? Why is it that you walk into a magic shop and you buy the potions and the +1 sword and all the things and the scrolls and whatever, and you walk out of there thinking it's not like it has the Greater Wizards Academy Association of Authenticity Seal of Approval and it's guaranteed to work or your money back. You just buy it and you go into the dungeon and you hope for the best, right? And I think that if you consistently make it to where your players are buying poison instead of potions, that's probably a bad way to go because that will end up badly. But I do think it is interesting if maybe this is something that they encounter from here to, occasionally. Because if you think about the carpetbaggers that happened, in our history where those people went south to the south during the Reformation and were selling snake oils and all this crazy stuff.
Well, you see that with like Ether or whatever.
Yeah.
And I listened to that Sawbones podcast or whatever, and it's a medical history podcast, and they were talking about how the evolution of ether into the medical world, and they were basically saying, okay, well, back in history, prohibition was happening, so they were like, okay, well, we'll start drinking ether, and
that's drinking it.
Yes.
Wow.
Apparently, the boiling point of ether is
really low, yeah.
Yeah, and it actually vaporizes inside the body. It's like 90 degrees or something like that. So you're warmer than that. You drink it, it vaporizes inside your body.
Whoa.
Right?
So what does it do when it vaporizes in your body?
Well, there's a chance of rupturing things, of course, as it would sound from that. But, and then also sometimes people just have this drunken euphoria state. And so I wish
you guys could see my face right now. Holy cow.
They started adding it to everything, like this snake oil thing. And they're like, the quote that she says is basically everyone was like, well, this makes us feel great. It must be medicine.
Right. Yeah. Well, they said that almost
make this medicine.
All of them had something else I read. I didn't know that ether did that too, but they said they had some form of alcohol and ether and ethylene glycol, I think, is in a lot of them as well, which does crazy things too as well. But I was just...
They started making these pills and originally started giving them out for menstrual cramps. And then they noticed how everybody else seemed to be having such a good time with these menstrual cramp pills. So anyways, it was really interesting, and it just reminded me of that because...
That's incredible. Well, but it's a good point, though, that
it's that era, where you start adding, okay, well, what does this cough syrup have in it? Well, a little bit of morphine and a little bit of, opium and a little bit of cocaine.
And yeah. Oh, yeah.
Like, I feel great.
Yeah. This amphetamine tincture has really given me a pickup today.
Fatigue gone.
Right. Yeah. This day in the mine has been not so bad now. But I guess it's just to say that there have been all kinds of crazy hucksters in our time, and it stands to reason that there are always people that are looking to make an easy buck. And if I can make some funny squiggles on a scroll and sell it to you as a spell of invisibility, I'm willing to bet that there's someone out there willing to try it and then skip town before it gets used, because that's how a lot of this stuff happened, is that they would sell something as one thing and then they would move on to the next town before the sort of aftermath caught up with them, right? And they were always on the run to the next town, to the next town, to the next town. And I think it could add some cool and interesting role-playing moments of well, we're on this quest. Crazy Dave's potion shop happened to sell me, instead of Cure Light Wounds, I got really drunk. It was 3 times distilled alcohol with some ether in it. And do we continue on the quest or do we go find Crazy Dave? Because we can't be having that.
Well, and maybe even it's not at like 100%. Maybe it's cut me own throat Dibbler from the Discworld, right?
Right.
Maybe like 6 out of 10 times you get an edible meat pie and your lunch is done, and man, at least it sure was cheap. But the other 4 times out of 10, ooh, there's some gastrointestinal distress that happens,
Right.
you know? So maybe Crazy Dave sold you and your buddy a Cure Light Wounds, but I got like a speed potion when what I really needed was to heal some damage.
Right.
He's just not reliable, Dave, but his prices
Can't beat him.
25% cheaper than the in-town shop.
So I think there's a lot of really cool potential there. And
But it adds a little comedy too,
Yeah,
which
and-
could be fun depending on how you're wanting to run your game.
I agree. But at the same time, it's a tightrope to walk because you don't want to push it too far or make it too common, because then you build this distrust in your players for everyone that they're going to encounter and buy things from. So I think that most of the things they buy should be legit, but I do think that there should be the potential that some of the more minor items they're going to buy that they're just going to assume are a Cure Light potion or whatever could potentially not be that.
And while we're on the topic of potions, why are nobody's characters making potions? Where are all these fantastical potions coming from? Is there like a tincture factory somewhere that I don't know about that's just
Yeah.
cranking these healing potions out for you to find randomly places or buy at the local convenience store? It just seems like we have wizards and we have clerics and there's druids too, so they're kind of like walking that nature magic herbalist kind of line there. But you know, what about alchemy? Where are our potion brewers? What about the people who are telling the future? Psychics, people reading runestones. I want to see those people in the game too. And then just a lot of the fantasy games aren't set up to create those kinds of characters. And I feel like that's just really disappointing. So I don't know if you can make your own subclass or just flavor it differently. I think this kind of goes in with sort of homebrewing your own spells too. That gives you the opportunity to bring in some of these other things that you're
Choose
just
some
not
more-
seeing in a lot of the traditional fantasy
Right.
games.
Maybe you make a more thematic spell list. So you go through and you're going to make this runecaster, right? And so they're able to make omens and maybe put temporary bonuses onto items by carving runes into them or whatever it is. And so it could be just as simple as you model it off of a basic class you have already, whether that's cleric or sorcerer or wizard or druid or whatever. And then you go back in and you make a custom spell list. And maybe at the beginning of it, you don't even make custom spells yet. Maybe you want to stick with what you already have in the game, but you want to make it more thematic. So you choose some wizard ones and you choose some cleric ones and maybe a druid one or whatever it is. And then you sort of build this spell list that's a little more customized. And maybe because he's a runecaster that enchant weapon, that doesn't need to be 3rd level now. That's his specialty. So maybe that's a 2nd level spell for him, right? And you can sort of customize them very easily by not doing any real work. It's just sort of shuffling things around and making things a little more thematic. And it can add a whole lot of thematic elements to your game with very minimal work initially. And then you can sort of grow it out from there. And if you want to continue to have that class and add more things to it and make it more thematic, it's super easy to. The only thing you have to be careful of, though, is that you want to keep things balanced so that the runecaster doesn't overrun everybody else and solve all the party's problems now.
I like kind of the way that they incorporate this a little bit in the One Ring system where you have like the lores. So herb lore is a thing that you can kind of incorporate into healing or what have you. And I imagine you could kind of do Burning Wheel much the same way. And
With
that
the
there's
Wises.
the Wises there
Right.
to add a little more flavor and depth and a bonus feature to the mechanic of when you're rolling for those things. And along with that is the idea of spell components. And I'd kind of written that back up towards the top somewhere, but we hadn't really, maybe that's in Rules of Magic. I don't know exactly where it falls. I guess it could be a segue to that. So I've never And I haven't played a lot of Wizards again because I have a natural aversion, but where it has at the end of each spell, here's the list of however many things that you need to make this happen. And I haven't sat down in a lot of games where anybody's really bothering to keep track of that, or then you like learn a spell that automatically gives you the things that you need in order to do all your other spells.
Right.
And that just sort of seems like shenanigans to me. I really like the depth that comes along with more of like the fairy type magic. So the components that you need are something that isn't necessarily quite so tangible. And maybe that depends on the kind of wizard you're playing. But like I was reading the Saga, the graphic novel, and in the very first volume of that, they're trapped by a bunch of vines. And one of the main characters knows like some magic from his home planet or whatever. And so they're stuck. They're going to get eaten by terrible woods creatures if they don't escape these vines. And he's like, okay, well, every magic has a price. I need to know a secret. And it has to be something. Can't just be like, whatever, I don't like peas. It has to be something that you honestly don't want someone else to know. And it's not something tangible. So I've always liked the idea of that, like your first memory.
They've incorporated that in Changing the Lost with the catches.
Yes.
You can power some of the changeling powers without spending, I can't think what the resource is, but it's a changeling version of blood in Changing the Lost. And if you have that, or that condition is apparent in this situation where you're trying to activate the power, then it happens without you having to spend that resource. And that's a really cool analogy of it. I never even considered it that way, but that is very cool. There's a lot of potential in there. Although I think if you have a more fairy tale world, then that 100% makes sense, and it's a really cool way to do that. But a lot of fantasy worlds, that their stuff isn't unless you're playing like a witch character, it's not exactly, doesn't line up, super well with that. But I think it really could be, you could use it in a way to say, I have this thing, right? It's the memory of your first love, right? And I have this memory, and that could make this charm spell when I use it 10 times more powerful, maybe. You could use it to increase the power or decrease the cost of certain things by having something that is sort of super thematic that way and works with that spell. That's super cool.
Well, the idea of talismans is kind of there, though, in your holy symbols or things that are imbued with good luck that give you some kind of casting bonus, things that have been blessed by your god, things like that.
All this stuff is, I know in a lot of fantasy games, there's a lot of rules to them. So whether you're playing something with less rules, like something like an OSR game like BX or LOTFP or Knave or something like that, all the way up to Pathfinder or D&D or whatever, right? So there are certain rules of Magic that exist. And I think that you can bend them, but I don't think that you should be breaking them. In a game like Fate of Freeport or something, it's a lot more flexible and a lot easier to do because it's more narrative and the rules are much more flexible and forgiving that way, right? But when you're talking about more system-heavy games, it's harder to, or I shouldn't say it's harder, you just have to tread carefully and know the limits, right? And a lot of the changes that we've talked about here initially are very thematic. So there's not a lot of rules breaking or bending you even have to do. It's just more about theme and tone to increase the wonder and how awesome Magic really should be in a world. But I think all those rules can be sort of pushed on and bent a little bit to customize things a little bit to really make things shine. And I don't think it's that hard to do. I think it's just hard to get started doing it. Like there's this fear that you're going to break things.
Yeah. Well, and it's kind of this thing too, like, okay, I bought this game in this current state and this is how it's meant to be played and this is how it should be played. And so it didn't occur to me for a long time that none of that matters.
No.
Now, granted, if you're throwing out so many rules, maybe there's another system out there that does what you want to do without having so much modification added on your point. But I think the most important thing to remember is if the rules of the game don't fit for the fiction that you're trying to tell, then get rid of what doesn't fit. or add rules that you do want there, or change things to make them how you want them.
Right.
Basically, as the GM, there shouldn't be a lot of hard lines that you're afraid to cross. There should be, there are general things that break the fiction, if you mess them up. So those should be pretty well established, like in the Harry Potter world, right? Like we can fix bones, but we can't bring people back from the dead.
Right.
So those things are built into your story.
And you should be able to know those right away.
Rules, yeah. When it comes to mechanical rules, make a mess. Experiment.
And then
it's not all science, is a bit of art too.
At the same time, I think it's fair to tell your players, hey, I'm thinking about this thing and we're going to try this. And if it's too broken, then we will change it back a little bit or whatever. And we can adjust things as we go along. And then it gives you a chance to involve your players in what's happening. So even if there is something that's broken, they can take the opportunity during a sort of a roses and thorns moment to say, I don't like the way this runecaster works. I think it's terribly broken. I think it completely negates what my wizard is capable of, and I don't like that. And that's a fair point if they have legitimate concerns that way. But you have to create that space at the table where everybody knows, hey, we're going to try some new things with this fantasy game and try and make our magic shine in a really cool way and try some new things. And I think you should be doing that with every aspect of your game to do what works for your table. If Magic as it is works great at your table, then don't change a thing, right? But at our table, we've played D&D so much and fantasy games so much that a lot of this stuff starts to fall flat, and it just doesn't have the same amount of appeal that it once did when we first started playing games, right? So we've had to sort of move some things and shift some things around and find new ways to make it work for us at our table and make it inspiring and awesome and draw us back into the story, into the table. And that is these are a lot of changes that we have made at our table. The LOTFP games that I'm running now all use the rules from the Vaginas or Magic Eldritch Conk in a way. I'm incorporating these things into my table because that is what makes it exciting for me. And I know Lacey says it all the time. I'm excited to play games that people are excited to run. And that's what is inspiring me to bring better stories to my table to sort of share with my players and whatever. So whatever works, go for it. And if what you have at your table right now still works because everyone has this sort of awesome newness to what D&D is and running it as it is 100%, then that's great and do that. But as that sort of newness wears off, don't be afraid to sort of shift gears and sort of change what you need to bring that newness back to it. I guess I have one quick question. All fiction and all media, stories, games, whatever. Favorite wizard?
I have to say Gandalf, but it's not so much because of the magic. It's just his personality. Right. It's his, like, he's been around for a long time and he's seen a lot of things. And he still finds joy in these simple, little, very human moments.
Right.
And I love that.
Right on. Now, I just sprung this question on you, just popped into my head as a way to kind of close this thing off in a cool way. Give me a minute to think of mine.
But it's a close second, though, because my second one is definitely the grumpy wizard from Sword in the Stone, the cartoon Merlin.
Oh, yeah. He is fun.
The thing
that
with
is true.
Squirrel.
With the owl.
It's probably just my childhood. I don't know that it was that great, but I remember it fondly.
I'm gonna do basically what you did, and I'm gonna go with two. Okay, so most recently, my favorite is Doctor Strange, and
That's a good one.
Maybe it's not just Doctor Strange. Maybe it's because of the whole world that they created in that movie. It's not the comic because I really didn't follow Doctor Strange as a comic book. Because I have this problem where like superpowers and magic are two separate things and neither tween shall they meet. But I love Doctor Strange and it was awesome.
More like, is it the movie or him specifically?
The way
Because Tilda Swanson is also in that movie. So if you want to take a second to think it over.
No, I don't like her character as much. I like the idea of him being such a cerebral person and a physician and being exposed to really good docs and how crazy, in such a crazy way, their mind works sometimes. I liked it's Doctor Strange and the way the magic works there and sort of his ability to sort of outsmart people with mundane thinking, but using magic with it is sort of what I really like in that way. And the special effects that went into that movie are just incredible. And the way the mirror dimension looks and all the craziness that happened there. Sort of that Inception moment when the city's full, like, oh, that's so amazing. And I feel like that's what I want to feel like I am experiencing when I'm at the table. That's the level of wonder I want in Magic, right? My second one, though, is got to be Rasslin from Dragonlance.
to say that.
Yeah, and that may be because of my childhood, just like your Merlin thing, and it's entirely possible. But I really like his storyline and how he is sort of the process of him learning magic and becoming more powerful. He sort of becomes more than human and starts to see things in a way that regular people don't, because he is so connected to magic and understands so much. And I like that sort of moment where he's still fundamentally human, but he doesn't see himself that way, and the conflict within himself and reconciling that with his love for his brother and all this. I like that inner turmoil of being human but not really being human anymore. So that's mine. As you know, we are a member of the Gonna Geek Network, so quick plug for On the Bubble podcast. Flash for War, the blackout campaign to save ABC's sci-fi drama Flash Forward. Many shows suffer from a lack of support from their own networks over the mid-season break. ABC's Flash Forward suffered both from the aforementioned lack of support and also from a much larger than normal break for the time. So check them out. That is On the Bubble podcast. Flash for War, the blackout campaign to save ABC's sci-fi drama Flash Forward, episode 27. And you can find them on the Gonna Geek Network. So I think that'll do it for us this week. Hopefully this will help you guys bring some more wonder and awesome to your table with some cool new ideas and ways to look at magic. As always, thank you to all of our supporters. Thanks to our Patreon supporter, Todd. And thank you to everyone who has gone out there and shared our podcast and reviewed us wherever you find us at. And as always, we will see you guys next week. Thanks for listening. This has been an episode of Just One More Fix. Music has been provided by Kevin MacLeod. You can find him at Incompetech.com. You can support us at Patreon.com/JustOneMoreFix or follow us on Twitter at JustOneMoreFix.